I insert it as background music. Once upon a time in the West. Because I see in the passage from the old cartography to the global information system, the same passage that took place at the time, from stagecoach to train. Who has seen the film will remember those who avoided the train. They moved forward and forward until they arrived on the ocean shore, and they had to accept reality. Today the same thing happens a bit in this transition from cartography to the information system. To define the information system, we have to say that it is found exclusively on digital media. The moment we say that the information system can be printed on paper, we no longer talk about the information system. An example of an information system can be a search engine on the internet. Nobody dreams but to print all the information reported in it. It is possible for a part, but not all. The most important side of today's information system, I say it today, because even cartography on paper, it was an information system. The modern information system is characterized by two basic elements. First of all, interactivity, and this is not possible to have it on paper. I click on a virtual image of the globe, and I go directly, with successive enlargements, to a small urban center, and even inside a certain building. In this case we are in the municipality of Zaracapriola, where there is a conference. It would be enough to install, in any environment, a webcam, and us. In real time we can witness what is happening inside. We could install it in a pizzeria or in a shop, and therefore, before going to a pizzeria, we can connect and see if the service is pleasant, or many others. Information. But what's important today, in the information system, is that everyone can provide news. We think of videophone, anyone who becomes a journalist correspondent. At all times, in all catastrophic events, there are images arrive thanks to video amateurs, never thanks to official services. If we take photogrammetric catalog of monuments damaged by the 1980 earthquake, we must acknowledge that they have been detected by staff not specialized in architectural survey. These findings were made by the photogrammetric unit of the urban police of Bari, and looking at the road and how they filmed, we have to admit that in this situation, an emergency room unit was much more important than the professionalism in the relief. Without saying that, who is not an expert, filmed, that maybe a technician wouldn't do, and allows us today, years later, to make a comparison between old and new buildings. Here we are in the Cathedral of Acerenza. If we zoom in on the trusses of the church, it is a restored church. Looking at it, we have to admit that.
Per evitare l'inflessione delle travi ci sta due supporti inclinati, testo scolastico, ci rendiamo conto. Ora se noi andiamo a vedere un qualsiasi testo scolastico,
which are held by a horizontal structure called chain to avoid the deflection of the beams. There are two inclined supports called thunderbolts that rest on a vertical element called monk. Now if we go to see any school text, we realize that the vertical element does not rest on the horizontal element. Not only that, but the inflection of the horizontal element is prevented by a bracket connected to the monk himself. The vertical element, well, if we look at the Cathedral of Acerenza, we easily realize that the monk rests on the chain. Paradoxical fact. While if we look at the natural section of the church, we see that the dross of the past truly respected the static canons. Making a comparison, let's see how slender and clean the old dross was, and how anachronistic today's is. Now if the cultural asset is to make culture, we must say that the coverage of the Church of Acerenza does not make culture. Not only, but you run the risk that the student who observes or detects it, take the Cathedral of Acerenza as an example of reference, there will be a crescendo, continuous degradation, so we'll get to that. Reinforced concrete trusses will be made for very small lights. The fact that, thanks to new technologies, everyone can do everything, it probably scares more than anyone. But I don't think so, because you go back to the past. In the past, to practice a trade, you didn't go to school. There was always the shop, where the craftsman worked, and, coincidentally, worked outside, or at the door of the shop, undoubtedly because the shop was narrow and dimly lit, but also to advertise their work. The most numerous in stopping, watching the craftsmen work, were the kids, and, among these, the craftsman was able to identify any helpers to grow. Then the helper become good, opened his own shop, and boasted that he had been a disciple of a certain master. The motto was the disciple must overcome the master. Let's not forget the case of that disciple, to whom the master had entrusted the painting just finished, to prevent any fly from settling, and the disciple rushed, in the absence of the master, to paint a fly, with such perfection, to be sent on a rampage, the master upon his return. Then the master noticed that the fly was painted and not real, and turned the reproach into praise. Are things that, perhaps, no longer happen today. They definitely don't happen anymore. However, it remains a methodology of a training method. In 1980, with the neighborhood laboratory, Renzo Piano attempted to resume this concept of the laboratory on the road. He brought the famous neighborhood laboratory into a cube, which opened onto a square, and foresaw the architect led, in analogy with the doctor conducted, who was to act as a consultant for the inhabitants, for small maintenance in the historic center. Obviously, as an idea it was quite interesting. There were electric motor transport machines, and many beautiful little things, but that neighborhood was devoid of soul. First of all, because if we see some pictures of the kids who observe who works, it doesn't take much imagination to understand that the kids were not there to learn a trade, but because they were the protagonists of a television shoot, and they had probably been placed ad hoc on the spot. We see these 6 kids then sitting around the table, and it seems they are discussing architecture, and beyond any doubt they were placed on those chairs, pending recovery. One cannot think today that one can work on the square, whatever the profession was. In the neighborhood laboratory of Renzo Piano, there was the project sector, open to all, but, forget it. Today we have to start again, the concept of spreading the way we work, and by other means, and this can be the internet. Since '96, for 10 years, my students put on the internet, in real time, your work, and someone even got job offers, thanks to the existing site on the internet. So if I had to imagine for a moment that a little boy learns to read and write since elementary school, when I say read and write in a new form, that is, like the internet, with new tools, and begins to create itself. Since elementary school, your own resume on the net, that famous competition is created automatically, that existed many years ago. There are no more shops. There are people who can demonstrate what they can do, and high-level laboratories who can demonstrate what can be done, and therefore there is a cultural process, and it can certainly go on and on. With the reform, today it is possible. The introduction of training credits, it really involves a job from the students, work that can be documented and shown to everyone. Not so much for a check on the student, how much to move that pride that you have at 15, 18, 20 years. What I saw, at least with my students, even if said among us, today the site is very popular, but at the beginning there was a certain fear in advertising their work. Copying was limited to begin with. Each young person has their own personal pride, and hardly copy, and tries to trim non-proper works. If the job ends up in a warehouse and will be lived, and if it is also advertised abroad, it's very nice to know that a student who goes with Erasmus abroad shows what he has done in his studies. Vice versa, it is very nice if he should come back and, in the face of many teachers who question exams done abroad, can demonstrate what he did, and this creates a resume. We return, with new forms, to what happened once. Our program is to launch a course, clearly for the sector of interest, in the case of relief, and it can be a distance course, where the student works at home. There is no point in moving to the university to listen to the lesson that will be via the network or on DVD, and has contact with the professor, just to discuss their work. And it must be a discussion where the teacher, or manages to cope, or must accept the principle that disciple who surpasses the master